Within 48 hours, the Russians achieved a type of breakthrough that would make Rommel blush. Hundreds of troops marching 15-20 kilometers under constant drone surveillance. Never have small infantry groups achieved such a success. Even Putin was shocked by these gains. Что, my mujiks achieved that? For real? As you can imagine, the situation was critical for our beloved Ukrainskaya Armia.
Our men flee the battlefield!
But not for long!
In the past few days, the Ukrainian command redeployed some of its most elite brigades like Azov to plug the gap. This time we have to praise the AFU for their quick reaction to the crisis. But as of now, the fog of war persists. So we'll try to clear things up. As Ukrainian forces in Pokrovsk were under heavy pressure, surrounded on three sides. At the end of July, small teams of Russian riflemen infiltrated their way to the city center.
All hope is failing, my lord!
The Ukrainian command barely had time to recover that on the 9th of August, Russian rifle teams were reported way beyond the contact line. A 10-inch penetration to be exact, whoops, wrong tab, a 10-kilometer penetration into enemy lines. Nope, actually this is all a lie, because in reality it's much worse. Everything was crumbling so fast that by the 11th of August, Russian units were spotted almost 20 kilometers behind Ukrainian lines. It's as if these Russian troops were told there was a 50% discount on vodka in Dobropilya. And you know what, during a discussion with Defense Politics Asia, he noticed how Azov accidentally self-snitched. A real 6950 moment. During the counterattack, Azov claimed to have liberated all the following villages. But as you can see, these are clearly outside the boundaries mapped by Deep State UA. Either Azov lied and claimed to have captured villages already under Ukrainian control, or the Russian breakthrough was much larger than announced by Deep State UA. Personally, I think it's option 2. Russian patrols probably reached all these settlements. But my friends, we will have to forgive the team behind Deep State UA. Otherwise, they will be sent to verify the front line at Pokrovsk themselves. As a reminder, I mentioned the Russian attack right in that sector in mid-July. And if the Russian command is diabolical, they will leave Pokrovsk and Kostiantinivka behind and push northwards along the Kazini-Tarets River. What was funny to me is how most analysts were completely shocked by this. But it's also funny because most of them just don't know history. During World War II, Soviet forces used the exact same infiltration tactics against the Germans on the Eastern Front. Copy-paste, but this time with a modern twist. You see, after shovel battalions, turtle tanks, and pipelines, you won't believe how the Donbass coal miners broke through this time around. Entire light infantry detachments equipped with anti-thermal cloaks to make them invisible to enemy drones, plus friendly UAV drops for supplies. But no spoilers, that's all I can tell you for now. And the total lack of Ukrainian drone strikes on these elements means they got through suffering barely any casualties. And as you can imagine, such tactics can easily be replicated. Anyway, in this video, we'll go through a step-by-step analysis of this Russian breakthrough in the Pokrovsk sector. That way you will understand exactly what happened and how they did it. And of course, we'll also go over the Ukrainian counterattack that followed. We'll try to make sense of this very confusing map released by Deep State UA, especially considering how the Russians have now launched phase 2 of their attack. Welcome to HistoryLegends, and here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukraine war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. However, as usual, before we can talk about this disastrous breakthrough, we have to understand how things even got there. This was the frontline situation around Pokrovsk, where we last left off on the 15th of July. As you can see, Russian forces from the 51st Combined Arms Army had broken through the TO504 road linking Pokrovsk to Kostiantinivka, and they were now completely overwhelming the Ukrainian left flank. As a result, the Ukrainian tactical grouping in Pokrovsk-Mirnohrad was facing encirclement, while the Russian 51st and 2nd Combined Arms Armies were only kilometers away from Ukraine's main supply lines, 4 kilometers away from the E50 highway, and 5 kilometers from the TO515 road going north of Pokrovsk. In such conditions, it became imperative for the General Staff of Ukraine to prevent the two enemy tips from touching. The situation was critical and now resembled very much the Battle of Avdiivka. Would the Ukrainian command learn from its mistakes and pull out? Or are they gonna double down and hold Pokrovsk at all costs? That's what we'll see in this video. Let's start with the events. On the 16th of July, Deep State UA conceded the loss of Piszczany to enemy forces. Remember, this is where the Ukrainian army launched big counterattacks in February and March 2025. Due to this Ukrainian resistance, the Russian 2nd Combined Arms Army could not break through the Udachne Kotline sector. But since then, they made sure to maintain pressure and pin down Ukrainian reserves. That's how the Russians continued to send small teams of infantrymen forward in order to infiltrate Ukrainian lines. For example, here you can see a Russian soldier struck by a drone from the 152nd Hiega Brigade north of the Main, near Kotline. Meanwhile, a bit to the east, although the village of Lysivka was marked as being part of the gray zone, most of it was actually under Russian control. We know this because the Ukrainians sent drone after drone to strike enemy units positioned there. However, in the past few months, the Ukrainians have lost their edge on drone warfare, and it was now Russian drone operators that were hammering Pokrovsk, targeting anything going in and out of the city. In this video, you can see them strike armored vehicles like a Swedish-made BVS-10, a Cossack APC, a Turkish-made Kirpi, but also dozens of cars and pickup trucks. They also systematically cleared the sky of enemy drones and destroyed numerous relay antennas. Although FPV drones look spectacular, Russian artillery was still the king of battle and caused heavy casualties by dropping massive loads all over the front. On the 18th of July, men of the 1st Battalion of the 4th Rubish Brigade of the National Guard launched a counterattack against Mykolaivka. It's this little village 11 kilometers east of Pokrovsk. As you can see in this video, one assault team is clearing some basements and houses in that sector. It looks like a win, but in reality Mykolaivka was essentially lost. All the Ukrainians could do was to launch hit-and-run attacks to smash enemy spearheads. 24 hours later, 7 kilometers to the north, Russian forces stormed the village of Fedorivka and thus expanded their beachhead over the Kazeni-Tarets River. At the same time, storm detachments of the Russian army were trying to get control over the Krasnolimanskaya mine east of Radinske. To get a better visual, here's a 3D map of the area. You can see the flat terrain, only interrupted by this industrial area, these two waste heaps, and these two reservoirs, which could create serious bottlenecks on the way to Radinske. For that reason, the artillerymen of the Somali battalion simply bombarded the entire mining complex. And to make things clear, those are not actual Somali combatants. It's just the old nickname of the battalion dating back 2014. It was just a joke from the early days of the Donbass war because this ragtag separatist militia did not resemble a military force but more like Somali pirates. On the 20th of July, Deep State UA conceded the loss of this entire area, which was most likely under Russian control for a couple days now, especially since Russian patrols were already operating in Mykolaivka and Mirolyubivka. Meanwhile, Russian drones harassed Ukrainian supply lines going towards Novoekonomichne. But it's important to note that Ukrainian aviation did not remain silent. Here you can see how Ukrainian MiG-29 bombarded the building in Malinivka with a GBU-62 JDAM-ER glide bomb. Further to the west, Russian assault squads advanced 1,300 meters and thus officially completed the capture of Shevchenko. Simultaneously, another storm detachment pushed 2,700 meters inside Svirove. Inch by inch, Russian soldiers were edging closer and closer to Pokrovsk. At any command, the Russian command could release them into the city and just fire in the hole. The Russians were literally only 3 kilometers away from the city center of Pokrovsk. By the way, during their rotations at the rear, Russian infantrymen were undergoing intensive training to counter enemy FPV drone attacks. The core of the training session consisted of agility by rolling over and improving their marksmanship to shoot down incoming UAVs. Although this seems a bit archaic, you have to understand that anti-thermal cloaks only work for a couple minutes, until the body's heat signature starts to seep through. This is actually very dangerous, because it can give a false sense of security to the soldiers wearing them. For example, they're infiltrating enemy lines at night thinking they're invisible, but Ukrainian drones are already onto them. But, big round but, make sure to stick until the end because this topic is the key to understanding how the Russians actually managed to break through north of Pokrovsk. Oh yeah, I almost forgot, I also wanted to tell you about a brilliant analyst on Twitter called Clément Molin. According to his post, he recorded 450 Russian airstrikes between the 11th and the 21st of July, the majority of them northeast of Pokrovsk. This means Russian Air Force was literally plowing through Ukrainian defenses. Many are criticizing the Ukrainians for not putting enough infantrymen in these fortifications. But what's the point? You can deploy an entire infantry platoon in one of these bastions and an FAB 500 will just wipe them out. This is the reality of the battle. And that's how a really bad day came for our beloved Ukrainskaya Armia. Russian troops mopped up the settlements of Fedorivka and Novotaretsky, but their forward elements were already spotted in Mayak, Nikanorivka, Suvorove, and some patrols were even reported 5 kilometers beyond the contact line. This is exactly what I told you in my previous video. And if the Russian command is diabolical, they will leave Pokrovsk and Kostiantinivka behind and push northwards along the Kaziani-Tarets River. By controlling these 4 villages, Sofivka, Shakhove, Volodymyrivka and Malak, they can do whatever they want in the northern part of Donetsk Oblast. If they do this, it's checkmate.
Hey, I've seen this one. This is a classic.
Russian generals after watching the video. As you can see, the Russian command selected the diabolical option. If they end up controlling this area, I'm telling you again, it's checkmate. Meanwhile, south of Pokrovsk, the Russian command of the 15th Black Hussars Brigade continued to pour its reserves inside Zverove. From there, they started infiltrating inside Pokrovsk proper. Individual Russian infantrymen were spotted everywhere across the village, but not a single Ukrainian rifleman. Nothing to worry about, the drones will get them. That's when, right here, on one of the main roads in the center of Pokrovsk, a Ukrainian vehicle was ambushed by Russian soldiers. At first, people thought it was a blue-on-blue incident. Of course, it was so far from the contact line, but it was indeed Russian DRGs in action. In Russian, DRG stands for Диверсионная разведывательная группа, translated to Sabotage and Reconnaissance Group. In this video, we can see a 2-man team of Russian soldiers clearing a building in that central sector. What a disaster! How did they even get there? Do you realize how bad that is? Enemy troops were already operating 2 kilometers beyond the gray zone. To make matters even worse, the entire Ukrainian logistics going towards Pokrovsk was in a critical situation. Vehicles transporting supplies and reinforcements were regularly targeted. In this first-person shooter experience, we see Ukrainian soldiers of the 68th Yega jumping off a pickup. Seconds later, an enemy drone is hovering above the vehicle, and then it explodes. As you can see, the pickup is now a complete write-off, and the soldiers will have to wait for another car to come pick them up, because moving by foot is not much safer, especially since now they have been detected. Hopefully their lift comes quickly before another drone comes after them. Meanwhile, Russian drones also destroyed Starlink antennas, making command and control for the Ukrainians much more difficult. In this footage, we can see a vehicle passing by multiple destroyed armored vehicles, before reaching this road protected by anti-drone nets. However, these nets are not as foolproof as expected. Drones can sneak in from the same entrance as the cars and just ambush incoming vehicles down the road. Otherwise, enemy artillery can cause entire sections of the nets to be destroyed, thus allowing more drones to sneak in through the gaps. On the 23rd of July, elements of the Russian 5th and 9th Motor Rifle Brigades advanced 1,500 meters and closed in on Novoekonomichne. In preparation of the attack, Russian artillery carried a devastating barrage. And that's when the first Russian patrols started entering the town. Eventually, the Ukrainian defense started faltering. Russian storm detachments were spreading across town. After a couple hours, the battle was over.
We have captured a building, my lord!
Russian troops raised the white-blue-red banner on Novoekonomichne. But, according to Deep State UA, some Ukrainian troops still held this small neighborhood. Meanwhile, on the right flank, in the west, after the storming of Zverove, Russian detachments were regrouping to support this attack and gain a foothold inside Pokrovsk proper. The first wave prepared the assault aboard motorcycles. However, drone operators of the 1st Battalion, 155th Mechanized Brigade ambushed them while they were still in Shevchenko. That's when a second wave composed of 2 armored vehicles attempted a run for it. The first vehicle detonated, probably a mine, and the second one was immobilized a little bit further. But everyone inside these 2 vehicles quickly managed to disperse. These attacks are still safer than hopping on Air India flights. By the way, notice how the French-trained 155th Mechanized Brigade has a new emblem. They went from the scorpion and the flag of Rivne to a blue background, 3 fleurs-de-lis, and crossed swords. That brigade was holding the southern sector of Pokrovsk, not far from Zvirovy and Pischany. We have a Ukrainian drone strike on an isolated Russian soldier near the wreck of a French-made VAB from the 155th Brigade that was destroyed back in March. Overall, it was very difficult for Ukrainian drone operators to spot Russian riflemen due to all the greenery. At the end of the day, drones can only target what they see. Overall, the situation for the Pokrovsk garrison was becoming critical, especially as Russian troops continued to press forward from all directions. So this is what a deputy commander of one of the battalions of the 68th Jaeger Brigade with the call sign Italian had to say to TSN Ukraine.
Стверджую, так, відчуття є, що нас якби трошки обходять проблема, а в плані логістики доїзду до міста Покровськ та пересування по самому місту та його околицям насправді вже стає небезпечно.
Як їм вдається добиратися до міста, наскільки зараз небезпека з цими ДРГ, які можуть вже шкодити нам у місті?
На жаль, на превеликий жаль. Це банально просто. Це вклинення в міжпозиційний простір між, скажімо, тими з'єднаннями, які також обороняють як південно-західні і західні околиці міста.
On the 24th of July, the Financial Times released this article where they concluded it was a mistake to stay in Bakhmut so long. This is what I said over and over during the course of the battle. Yet a couple months later, the Ukrainians would repeat the same mistake in Avdiivka, and now they're following the same path in Pokrovsk. The way I see it is that the problem of the general staff is that Ukrainian commanders have Soviet mentality, but without access to Soviet resources. What's the result? What we're witnessing right now with the AFU. That same day on the 24th, Ukrainian aviation spotted the building in Novoekonomichne serving as barracks for Russian troops, and then destroyed it using a barrage of Grad missiles. When I first saw this video, I thought it was a bit random. Maybe it wasn't even worth mentioning. But then came the following news. Russian troops were spotted 3 kilometers north of Popy Yar. And now we understand how Novoekonomichne served as forward operating base for this entire push. This is where Russian troops regrouped before going to the front. So, once again, this goes to show the importance of capturing urban areas. Between the 25th and 26th of July, no major territorial changes to be reported, although I have this video to show you. We see Russian war correspondent Andrei Filatov on a motorcycle. He drives on the main road and then takes a sharp turn to the right. As he turns, vroom, a drone comes crashing in. Had he not turned, he would have secured a spot in Valhalla. Meanwhile, Russian artillery continued to pummel Ukrainian positions in Pokrovsk. The TOS-1A Syrsky fired one salvo after another, showering thermobaric rockets on the high-rise building micro-district. That's also how one of the command posts of one of the units of the 27th Brigade of the National Guard of Ukraine was completely destroyed on the western side of the city. And I'm not done, then it's the aviation that dropped FAB bombs all across Pokrovsk. Here you can see the results of all these bombardments in the Pokrovsk-Mirnograd sector. As a consolation prize, it seems Ukrainian drone operators managed to spot and destroy one of those TOS-1As that caused so much destruction. By the 27th of July, Russian forces continued advancing through the ruins of Zvirovy. The Russian 2nd Command Arms Army was building up its forces in that sector for many days now. Something was brewing. It certainly wasn't freshly brewed coffee. This video is sponsored by... No, just kidding. No sponsor. The true sponsors though are my Patreon members. If you want to join, the link is in the description below. The next day, Russian ATGM operators managed to snipe a dugout, and then a drone flew into the opening. This happened north of Syrsky, so we can think that the Russian 137th Motor Rifle Brigade was also preparing an assault in this direction. As a matter of fact, tanks like this T-72B3M were also brought in to shell Ukrainian positions in that sector. We even learned that if need be, they can also be used as artillery with a range of up to 12 kilometers. And of course, now we're going to see posts saying that the Russians have run out of artillery pieces. But how can it be? Because apparently they also ran out of tanks. Jokes aside, if we look on the map, the tanks shelled this part of Lysivka, and the previous ATGM strike happened right here. So you can get an idea of Ukraine positions in the area. Most of Lysivka was indeed in Russian hands, apart from this sector. Further north, Russian forces pushed 3 kilometers northwards east of Mayak, but also towards Volodymyrivka. It's only 24 hours later that Deep State UA conceded the loss of this farm west of Popy Yar in a 2.5 kilometer withdrawal. Russian spearheads were advancing fast. We have this video of a Ukrainian bomber drone of the 82nd Air Assault Brigade targeting a Russian position with an anti-tank mine. This confirms that Russian rifle teams were literally just outside of Volodymyrivka. At the same time, Ukrainian drones were bombing Russian troops right at the center of Poltavka. And if you pay attention, you will notice how the settlement was almost already surrounded. All this while the last Ukrainian defenders of the village prayed not to be targeted by the next artillery shell. The Russian army's diabolical plan was taking shape, yet it seemed nothing was done by the AFU to protect that sector. Here we have a story of two soldiers that enlisted because of the 18 to 24-year-old recruitment campaign, explaining how they escaped encirclement near Pokrovsk. What's interesting is how in the story was said that out of the 12-man squad, only these two were volunteers. How I interpret it is how everyone else was probably a Mobic. Alright, here's $1 million question. What happens when you forcefully enlist civilians and send them to the front without any training? That's right, desertion. According to Soto reports, the AFU suffered from a catastrophic desertion crisis since December 2024. We're talking about 135,800 desertions, almost 17,000 per month. And that explains Ukraine's manpower crisis. Everyone they mobilize, half of them become casualties in the first weeks, and the other half deserts.
A great success!
That's why despite months and months of mobilization, rifle units are constantly understaffed. Because of that, the Ukrainian army hoped that their drone coverage would be enough to prevent the infiltration of enemy rifle teams. On the 29th of July, Russian forces advanced 3.5 kilometers beyond Arazine, all the way to this waste heap, but also beyond this reservoir. This means 4 elements of the 9th Motor Rifle Brigade were only 3 kilometers away from the first houses of Rodinsky, the town controlling the supply lines going towards Pokrovsk. 24 hours later, southwest of Pokrovsk, another group of Russian infantrymen was targeted in the area of Udachny. You can see how this soldier was literally all alone, and we can't help but notice his old age. I just hope he wasn't sent forward as bait. And in this one, we see 3 riflemen walking in the open before being ambushed by a drone. All this to say that once again, Russian efforts to outflank Pokrovsk from the west had failed. On the 31st of July, Ukrainian drone operators of the 3rd Battalion, 25th Airborne Brigade, dropped explosives on a burning building in Pokrovsk. At the same time, the Ukrainians launched a couple unmanned ground vehicles into that sector, detonating multiple positions. Nothing to worry about, right? Blyat, sir, those are our buildings! The problem is that this was geolocated right here at the center of Pokrovsk. Not somewhere on the outskirts, but right in the middle of the city. In this video, we can see a 2-man Russian sabotage team moving street by street. You see dozens of such DRGs had effectively infiltrated Ukrainian defenses and taken position inside Pokrovsk. Russian DRGs were literally everywhere. There's even a video of 2 elderly Ukrainians guiding a fiber optics drone to eliminate the Russian soldiers that occupied their home. The Russian objective was to cause panic. It was a low-risk, high-reward gamble. If it paid off, half Pokrovsk would have been theirs at a very low cost. As a summary, this was the frontline situation in mid-July, and this was the situation 2 weeks later by the end of the month. Although Russian efforts on the western flank failed to materialize, they made a lot of progress on the eastern side. There they were in the process of completing the encirclement of Pokrovsk, and to add insult to injury, entire Russian DRGs managed to infiltrate Ukrainian lines all the way to the center of Pokrovsk. August 2025. By the 1st of August, the gray zone greatly expanded and Suvorove was now in contested territory. Russian patrols had reached the outskirts of Radinsky, while other storm detachments got to Volodymyrivka, while Poltavka was also getting swarmed. Meanwhile, if we move south of Pokrovsk, the Ugra battalion of the 35th Motor Rifle Brigade stormed Novoekonomichne and then raised its banners on the settlement, including the flag of their native Khanty-Mansi Autonomous Okrug. They came from deep inside Siberia to clap some Ukrainian cheeks. As the ring around Pokrovsk was tightening, the Russians like it that way, very tight. But this also meant Mirnohrad was feeling the fire from Mordor. Ruins and towers of smoke everywhere. Entire districts had been struck by Russian firepower. Enemy rifle teams were approaching from all directions. To make matters even worse, a special forces team operating in the city was targeted by Russian drones and was destroyed. By the 2nd of August, the gray zone expanded another 1.5 kilometers towards Radinsky. This means some Russian sabotage teams were already operating right next to the TO-515 road. But who knows, maybe it was just rumors, exaggerated claims. Oh no, It's legit. On the 3rd of August, Deep State UA confirmed all these territorial gains. Russian forces had effectively advanced 3.5 kilometers from Fedorivka, captured the village of Syrsky, and were now less than 3 kilometers away from the TO5-15 supply road. Further south, between the two waste heaps, Ukraine's 38th Marine Brigade spotted Russian soldiers hiding inside a basement and detonated the position. The problem is that this happened right here in Krasny Liman. Now you can see the two pincers approaching from the main road and about to close down on Rodinsky. I don't know what type of reserves the Ukrainians had that could counterattack, but yeah, the situation is not looking good. 10 kilometers from the contact line, a Russian fiber optics drone destroyed a Ukrainian T-64 BV tank in the northern part of Pokrovsk. In an attempt to stem the flow of enemy reinforcements, the Ukrainian Air Force dropped 2 GBU-62 bombs on Malinivka. So this airstrike happened here, and 7 kilometers from there, drone operators of the 33rd Mechanized Brigade served as artillery observers for a HIMARS strike on Ivanivka. 24 hours later, on the 4th of August, Deep State UA confirmed the loss of Poltava. Whoops, I mean Poltavka. We're not there yet, Poltava, no, we're not there yet. Hopefully we don't get there, but if we do, well, you'll know it's really GG well played. So, I repeat, as Poltavka fell, the Ukrainian 44th Mechanized Brigade was already shelling enemy dugouts near Rusin Yar. Russian troops were advancing in the countryside like ants, and more reinforcements were coming up the main road going towards Volodymyrivka. In response, the Ukrainian 82nd Air Assault Brigade immediately shelled the entire road. Meanwhile, the remaining 5 Ukrainian Mobiks holding the front line were getting harassed by enemy FPV drones. Just north of Rusin Yar, 2.5 kilometers away, an M113 APC was immobilized, and then it's the German-made Bega Panzer II sent there to recover that armored vehicle that got hit by Russian drones. It's like calling the firefighters and it's their truck that catches fire. Further south in that area we mentioned before, between Lysivka and Suchy Yar, the mad dogs of the 74th Motor Rifle Brigade kept hammering these two settlements. Eventually some Ukrainian units had enough and abandoned their combat positions amid the ruins.
Disorder! Our men flee the battlefield! They flee!
Not far from there, the Ukrainian 155th Mechanized Brigade tried to retake the village of Belgica. Literally Belgian. Like tourists expected, waffles in Bruges, they got Molenbeek instead. We don't have many details, but the assault failed, and Russian birds finished off the last armored vehicles. The poor 155th. Not only they get hammered in attack, but also when they stand still in defense. Here you can see samples of heavy Russian shelling right into shattered enemy dugouts, making life miserable for Ukrainian infantrymen. The Russians also started dropping leaflets calling to surrender to the positions manned by the 155th Mechanized Brigade that was entrenched in the Lazurny micro-district in Pokrovsk. And since we're talking about the 155th, here you can see through the eyes of one of its Leopard 2A4 tanks driving through the ruins of Pokrovsk. We can also notice this tactical sign on one of these Leopards. 4 white arrows pointing in different directions. Apparently it's been used since April, and it belongs to the operational tactical grouping, Donetsk. In front of them, Russian T-72s were polishing their long and intimidating tubes for their upcoming safari hunt. 100% this will be the setting of a Russian war movie in the coming years, just like T-34. But now they're gonna do part 2 with T-72 or T-90, but not the T-14 Armata. This we don't talk about. That's when Deep State UA released a long analysis about the strategic importance of Rodinsky. In summary, if it falls, the Russians could use the urban area as a forward operating base to accumulate troops and stockpile munitions, but also as a staging ground for the complete capture of Pokrovsk. It's not a surprise because I also told you about this in the past. On the 6th of August, while the center of the cauldron held, the phalanx started crumbling. On the western side of Pokrovsk, the Russians managed to advance 600 meters while closing in on Udachne, covered by 2B9 82mm mortars. Here you can see a 2-man Sturm Binom of the Rikari regiment advancing through the ruins of Gondor before clearing a dugout inside a trench line. Not far from there, another assault group carried out a similar team-building workshop. Meanwhile, on the northeastern side of the map, Deep State UA conceded the loss of this entire sector, which, as we know, was already lost a couple days ago. The battle was now officially taking place on the outskirts of Rodinsky. Entire Russian rifle teams were respawning in this area. and then walking through fields as if they were on an agro-tourism trip, it was indeed very hard for Ukrainian drones to catch them all. Ukraine needed more of the 4 words that frightened the Americans the most: boots on the ground.
No! God, please, no! No!
Now let's take a quick look at the situation in the center. Here we see a Baba Yaga drone of the 68th Yaga bombarding a Russian unit. Thing is, this was geolocated right here along this rail embankment. Are you seeing where I'm trying to go with this? In my opinion, the Russian plan is to use the cover of all the trees of this rail embankment to sneak right into Pokrovsk. This is literally what they've done since the Battle of Ocheretine. In this case, not only would it force all the Ukrainian units here to withdraw, but it could cut the Ukrainian defense between Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad in 2. On the 7th of August, the gray zone expanded once again northeast of Pokrovsk, between Mayak and Novoekonomichne. It's only 24 hours later that Deep State UA acknowledged the Russian gains west of Mayak, plus 3 kilometers, with Russian patrols edging around Dorozhnie. Now comes the key part of this entire breakthrough, so listen closely. Russian units were converging and almost sprouting all across this Balka, this sort of valley, covered in many forested areas, which, as you can imagine, can camouflage a lot of troops. Remember the spot. Okay, on continue, jetzt geht's weiter. Now, a little bit to the east, in Poltavka, it's because of this bomber drone video that we know that some Russian units made it 1,600 meters beyond the village. This will also become very important in a moment. The breakthrough. Meanwhile, this is when we got confirmation of Russian progression inside the city center of Pokrovsk. More and more footage was released showing how far Russian DRGs had spread. All this was geolocated in this sector almost 5 kilometers beyond the contact line. Who knows how many more detachments managed to sneak in? Actually, Russian DRGs reached all the way up to the Pokrovsk train station. How do we know this? It must be Russian propaganda! Well, actually, it's because Ukraine's 425th Skala regiment captured many Russian soldiers in that sector. From the 32 prisoners they showed on camera, we know that at least 8 came from the Pokrovsk sector. What's also interesting is that these 8 POWs came from 4 different brigades. The 9th, 30th, and 74th Motor Rifle Brigades, as well as 4 POWs from the 1st Slavyansk Brigade of the DPR. Additionally, Deep State UA reported that out of these 150 saboteurs, 120 were eliminated and 30 managed to reach the city. I'm just relaying the information. Is it true? Is it false? I don't know. Deep State UA also reported that the Russian operation involved 50 people from 3 companies. Makes sense considering there were 3 Russian brigades deployed on that front, as if each one of these brigades sent one of its DRG detachments forward. From what the Russian POWs revealed, we also get a better picture of what happened during this sabotage mission. We learned that they spent 4 days in the industrial area in Pischane, and then advanced 600 meters per day for 10 days all the way inside Pokrovsk. Communication, water, and food was provided by drone drops. To avoid drone detection, they used anti-thermal cloaks and hid in random shelters. When the first reports emerged of Russian soldiers popping up inside the city, for sure the Ukrainian command thought, "Blyat, not another pipeline!" But we know for a fact they immediately sent reserves there to stabilize the front and expel these illegal migrants. Are you starting to understand what happened north of Pokrovsk? Well, thank you for your patience. We have finally arrived for the breakthrough. On the 9th of August, the Russians from their hidden positions in the woods west of Mayak, in this Balka we mentioned before, broke through in every direction. They advanced 3 kilometers northwards, but then look at the gray zone. It stretches for another 7 kilometers. I repeat, this means plus 10 kilometers in a day, and plus 3 kilometers to the west. Dorozhnie was being completely overrun. How could this happen? If we look at the Ukrainian formations in that sector, we have the 4th Rubish Brigade of the National Guard, the 1st Assault Regiment Da Vinci, both very good units. The 92nd Assault, also an excellent formation, and the 82nd Air Assault Brigade. Those are all part of some of Ukraine's best units. So this time we cannot say it's because the Ukrainians positioned some of their weakest units at the most critical point. Yet the rodeo continued on the 10th as Suvorove fell into Russian hands. Plus 3 kilometers as Russian storm detachments gained a foothold on the railway line north of Pokrovsk. And as the Ukrainians were trying to digest all this, boom! Plus 8 kilometers on the 11th of August. two intimidating shafts, one with a curve and another straight one, pushing deep into the rear of Ukrainian defense. That's how Russian DRGs established control over the outskirts of Zoloty Kolodias and Vyzyeli. And this was confirmed by a later video of Ukrainian forces using unmanned robots in that same village of Vyzyeli. I agree, all these gains might seem very sus, but then this info was confirmed by a Ukrainian military blogger, who confirmed that enemy troops were in fact operating in that area. Just like with the infiltration mission inside Pokrovsk, the Russians did the same, but this time in open terrain. They probably selected the most motivated men of multiple brigades and battalions. According to some sources, for many weeks they trained at the rear. Their mission was to penetrate deep inside enemy rears, create chaos and disrupt the work of Ukrainian reinforcements. But to do so, they had to learn how to use these anti-thermal cloaks correctly. This means cooling them on the ground in advance and not using them longer than allowed by the instructions, because they stop camouflaging once heated, like we saw earlier. Each DRG group was then guided step by step via radio and drones. In case they risked detection, the saboteurs would lie on the ground and cover themselves with the cloaks on command. They were also resupplied using UAV drops. Without boots on the ground, detecting such small rifle teams in bushes, urban areas and forests was almost impossible. And to top it all off, the elite Russian Rubicon drone operators made sure to identify the positions of enemy UAV teams and suppressed them before the assault started in order to prevent their drone launches. So that's how the Russians broke through. For that reason, the gray zone expanded all the way to Novoekonomichne, Marivka. What a disaster! Catastrophique! This also means the Russian forces managed to break through Ukraine's last line of defense in Donbass. Just like that, the infamous Donbass line was breached. What's the point of building all these fancy fortifications when you don't even have the manpower to hold them? Completely useless. 40 billion hryvnias wasted. Russian forces are now only a stone's throw away from Dobropilya, which is one of Ukraine's most important logistic hubs in the regions. It's from there that they dispatch reinforcements and supplies to Pokrovsk. Some Ukrainian telegram pages like Osu v Dniepro reported that infiltrations do not mean that the enemy has taken control and secured all this area. And that is correct. However, others like Bogdan Krotevich, the former chief of staff of the Azov Brigade, are much more pessimistic. He blamed the general staff for this failure. He wrote, "The systemic problem began with the depletion of reserves, the widespread fragmentation of units across the entire front line, the allocation of mobilization resources to cronies, and the complete lack of strategic or even operational vision of the theater of operations among parts of the military leadership." And if you remember some of my previous videos, this is also the conclusion of my analysis. The problem is that this breakthrough was too successful. These Russian detachments bypassed most Ukrainian outposts they encountered. Yes, in theory they gained a lot of ground, but such light infantry units were not strong enough to actually secure it. And bypassing enemy outposts also meant that reinforcements from the second wave could not reach the tip of the spear as easily. In a way, it was like an airborne operation, but on ground. In response to this breakthrough, the Ukrainian command immediately dispatched some reinforcements, including the entire 12th Brigade Azov of the National Guard, that was redeployed from the Tarietsk cauldron to the northern side of the breakthrough to cut the enemy's axis of progression, and from there, they counterattacked. Some people mentioned that the entire 1st Azov Corps was deployed, but it's only the 12th Brigade Azov of that corps. They were also supported by the paratroopers of the 79th Air Assault Brigade. But still, overall, 4 to 5 Ukrainian brigades were urgently brought from various sectors to plug the gap and counterattack. Then came images of the first Russian POWs that were captured. Mostly men from the 132nd Brigade Berkut from the DPR. Once again, these damn Donbass coal miners! Vyzyeli was cleared by the 93rd Brigade, and there they captured another 3 Russian soldiers. And that's how Azov's Einsatzgruppen were now on the hunt for enemy DRGs, one village at a time. The Azov Brigade announced that in the following 3 days, enemy irrecoverable losses amounted to 271, plus another 101 wounded and 13 captured, for a total of 385 Russian losses. Even if these numbers are most likely inflated, It can provide an idea of the size of the Russian DRGs that infiltrated Ukrainian lines. However, like I told you in the introduction, the most shocking is how Azov accidentally self-snitched. In their report, they wrote, "As a result of search and strike actions, the following settlements have been cleared: Hrudsky, Rubizhny, Novoekonomichne, Petrivka, Vesely, Zoloty Kolodias." Hold on. Either this means the Russian breakthrough was much larger than announced on Deep State UA, or that means Azov liberated villages that were already in Ukrainian hands. Knowing how much Deep State UA has been coping lately, I think we'll go with option 1, that the Russian breakthrough was much larger. And according to the latest news, by the 15th of August, it became clear that the Ukrainian army contained the initial breakthrough north of Pokrovsk, and with the follow-up counterattack, the Russians lost about half the ground they had gained. But once again, Deep State UA's map doesn't make any sense. Somehow the Ukrainians did not clear these pockets of resistance, and this area marked in blue for liberated was already under Ukrainian control before the Russian attack. The consensus is that Russian forces now hold Kucherev Yar and Nikanorivka, and this is where the front line stands as of now. This means the Ukrainian counterattack was relatively limited. The fog of war continues, and the next few days will determine if the Russians can hold on to the salient. However, we can be sure that reinforcements are on their way. This is what we're seeing right now. It seems the Russian command is working on expanding the salient, with a push to the west but also to the east, namely by capturing the villages along the Sofivka-Mayak axis, aka the diabolical option we mentioned before. These settlements are also very important from a tactical perspective. The Russians need to secure the settlements of Shakhove and Volodymyrivka in order for their supply lines to reach the breakthrough area. Right now, everything has to go through this Balka, and it's not very efficient, especially not for motorized units. While all this was taking place northeast of Pokrovsk, 4 elements of the Russian army managed to get a foothold inside Rodinsky. And we know this because of the following Ukrainian artillery strikes. The Ukrainians have to hold this town at all costs. Otherwise, it's GG well played, the fun is over, time to pull out. We can also see that by the 15th of August, Ukrainian forces counterattacked and regained control of the railway north of Rodinsky. We can expect heavy fighting around this area in the coming days. Late on the 11th of August, a Russian BTR with troops was detected by a drone and then destroyed by artillery and FPVs. This took place on this tree line south of Udachny. It's not a surprise that the next morning, on the 12th, Russian riflemen were spotted right at the center of Udachny. At the moment, we can believe that heavy fighting is still taking place there, and we can estimate that the eastern half of the village is under Russian control. Udachny is the last village on this line. If it falls into enemy hands, it would threaten the entire Ukrainian right flank in Pokrovsk. The most important takeaway of this video is that Ukraine's commander-in-chief Syrsky will try to hold Pokrovsk at all costs, just like in Avdiivka. Meanwhile, from an operational perspective, Rodinsky and Udachny still represent the most strategic positions to hold for Ukraine. Overall, the situation hasn't changed much since my last video a month ago. All I can tell you right now is that with the AFU's main reserves having been sent to counter the Russian breakthrough north of Pokrovsk, the front line could face another crisis as the sudden redeployment could have weakened other sectors. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.